It's now my pleasure to introduce our Chief Officer for Community Engagement and Diversity, Dr. Margaret Spearman, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good evening. I am thrilled and deeply honored to introduce our keynote speaker, a leader of women and human rights, Miss Loretta Ross. Ms. Ross is a recognized author and leading expert on women's issues, racism, and human rights, who uses her passion, her intelligence, and her tenacity to make social change happen. Here are just a few extraordinary examples of how she's transformed social justice issues into real and lasting social change. As the national co-director of the 2004 March for Women's Lives in Washington, D.C., she mobilized one of the largest protests in U.S. history and more than 1 million participants. As program research director for the Center for Democratic Renewal, a national anti-Klan network, she used her research on hate groups and partnered with universities, schools, and community groups to fight bigotry everywhere. As an award-winning writer, she has chronicled the history of African American women and championed reproductive justice in numerous and noteworthy books and articles. As the co-founder and national coordinator for the Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, she has harnessed the energy of advocates across the country to create a movement for reproductive justice. And as a rape survivor who was forced to raise a child born of incest and also survived sterilization abuse, she is a model of a woman who has thrived and flourished despite the traumas that so often impact low-income women of color. Ms. Ross is an inspiration to me and to all of us who struggle toward justice and equality in our communities, our nation, and in our world. The title of Loretta's talk is Activism is the Art of Making Your Life Matter. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our 2016 graduating speaker, Miss Loretta Ross.
All right. No, I don't need to stand. How y'all doing? You can tell I'm from the South, so we have to speak first. I really, first of all, want to thank the students for inviting me, and I also should say that if you don't like something I'm saying, it's their fault. Thank y'all for taking such a chance on such a woman known for being a radical. You know, and only my mother thinks I'm famous, so I really want to appreciate that. I'm going to dedicate my brief remarks today to about being consciously in community with each other. And to do so, I think we have to embrace our opportunity and our privilege to use these privileges to change the world and leave a very large footprint in this passage through life that I kind of view with joy. But I haven't always been happy. I've just managed to get there. For the past few years, I've been focusing on and inspiring activists in the human rights movement to understand how we cannot afford to be cynical when we're assessing the state of our world or our responsibility to it. Now, I majored in chemistry and physics, so I'm kind of like a left brain girl. So I read science fiction. Anybody else read science fiction? Yeah. It's kind of hard being in a right brain movement when you're a left brain person. But one of my favorite science fiction writers is a woman named Lois McMaster Bujold. And she says, cynicism is a morally supine position. I love that. And what I interpret from this is that cynicism is the lazy person's armor, the person who's afraid of hurt and disappointment and uses snark as disguise. When I apply this to my passion, the building of a human rights movement here, I believe we have an opportunity to make democracy happen. It is not something that is inherently fair or democratic. You can just look at today's politics and figure that out. But each past generation has inherited the opportunity to make moral choices, to make this place better. So I want to speak specifically to you graduates who I hope become social justice activists, no matter what jobs you get. One of the other things I've learned in life is that as you become a social justice activist, you really care so much less about your reputation. You know, your reputation is what other people think that they know about you. But your integrity is what you know about yourself. And you should keep those two things separate. Guard your integrity, screw the reputation. Because you'll never be able to control what others think about you anyway. But you can control what you think about yourself. I think that's a really important lesson. And social justice work is such an honorable cause. As graduates, speaking directly to y'all, you obviously need a job. But you also need a passion to get you through life with zest and joy. Because those of us who look unflinchingly at the world are basically looking at the vomit. You know, those ugly things people are doing to each other. And we're either to put a bandage on the wound or maybe even at work more systemically, try to stop the wound from happening altogether. But the hard part is making your need for a job and your passion synchronize. That's the really hard part. The question isn't how to own more. Actually, that's easy. You know, we live in a world where consumerism is incredibly easy. We can always own more, but what we can't do is always be more. And that's what I'm talking about when activism is the art of making your life matter, because you have an opportunity to be more, which is the most precious thing you can do for yourself. And so against the doubters, the haters, the friends, even the lovers who boxed me into their disappointing expectations of me, all I needed to do was figure out what my passion was and then figure out a way to get paid to do it. That's what I do, and I encourage you to do so. Find that thing that gets you up every day. Find that thing that you would do for free, just don't tell them. Yeah? And then find somebody to pay you for doing what you would do for free. Life don't get no better than that. Trust me. And so this brings me back to my title, The Art of Making Your Life Matter. I want to make sure that you understand that you can become a conscious political activist and your life will forever matter because you will know and be able to look over your shoulder and say, damn, I made a difference. And I know I did. And even if nobody else recognizes it, I know I did. Because, of course, the best victories aren't the ones you brag on. And so you know that about yourself. And the beauty of being an activist is that we can bring our very imperfect selves to a perfect mission, making the world better. It doesn't get any better than that either. And it allows us to own our mistakes as warrior marks to help us do better the next time. And that doesn't mean that you won't hurt others. If the harm was unintentional, you can own your responsibility in it and move forward, trying to do more good than harm the next time. I also want to talk about what I'm doing now in closing, because I don't know how much time I've used up, probably too much. Okay. I'm working on trying to create a culture shift right now. I'm working on transforming our calling out practices into calling in practices. And I think that is so overdue, because I think we are entering a period where we take our radical political consciousness that we learn, all the isms, the sexism, the racism, the transphobia, the things we bore our family with. And we've taken all this radical political consciousness and we weaponized it against people. As if learning these multisyllabic words make you somehow smarter or better or more conscious or something. And that is the worst misuse of consciousness possible. I've seen political rhetoric used as a defense mechanism by people who are hurting or healing. We sometimes take other people down in ways that are very oppressive. This is called calling out, usually done as a public performance to show how smart or witty or conscious, or in the academic world, how we can put down everybody else's scholarship because it's part of our practice. I'm just saying. I suspect it's so difficult to get a PhD in America because the people on these committees only know how to call each other out. But that's another speech. When we call people in, we're creating what we need for ourselves: a place to grow, a place to share our struggles, to envision as brightly and as loudly as we can, to be accountable to each other, live conscious community with each other, and to transform the world. It allows us to be heard and to hear others. Calling in has to come from a place of love and respect, which is kind of hard because I get so angry at oppression. It's hard for me to see what's on the other side, which has to be love and respect. When I entered this movement, I was a rape survivor, as you heard, so I was unbelievably angry at people who would violate children, because I was a child. When I started doing work against the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazi movement, which incidentally brought me to the Pacific Northwest quite a bit. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I used to think people that joined hate groups didn't deserve my respect, didn't deserve my concern. And it wasn't until I learned to deprogram white supremacists that I started to see their humanity. And I started inching towards understanding what the politics of love really look like. Because it's not just loving people who agree with me. It's loving people because they deserve the love, regardless of my political opinions. And I have to honestly say, it's still a process because we will live in a world populated by many assholes. I'm just saying. But too many times our social justice spaces have become toxic, isolating, discouraging for people to join out of fear that they don't know the right language or the right pronoun to use, that they will make mistakes that get publicly and cruelly criticized. Too many times we use our radical consciousness and blow up the Thanksgiving family dinner because Uncle Joe says something we felt we needed to call him out on. Yeah, that makes you real welcome. We can make our spaces much more compassionate and welcoming to build our movement by fostering a culture of accountability. I'm not talking about doing away with accountability. I'm talking about seeking accountability through love, not punishment. And it's not surprising that we choose punishment because we live in a carceral system. We live in a system that punishes people, imprisons people. So I'm not surprised we don't have other models of accountability, but we have the opportunity to create them. Calling out, calling in is not another false binary. Y'all have heard of binaries. But it's a continuum, because no course of action works for all situations. Sometimes people just do need to be called out. But there are a small and select few, not based on difference of opinion, not because they don't understand not to call me the colored girl, not because of those things. I call out people who indulge in an excess of self-righteous privilege. I call out people who are mean and hypocritical, because I really don't have any tolerance for them, and I don't want them in my movement anyway. But I accept the fact that none of us are perfect, error-free activists. We're gonna make big mistakes. And when your footprint becomes as large as mine, your mistake ends up in the Washington Post. Been there, done that, and you survive it. We value fairness, but we challenge the misuse of privilege. We support victims and survivors. We create safe spaces, but we do not treat safe spaces as wounds from which you will never, ever receive hurt. We understand the difference between a genuine threat and someone who's just offended you. And if you don't understand that difference, you're not necessarily ready for the danger of fighting oppression. Because I've never quite figured out why people who say they want to fight oppression somehow think that they can do it from a safe space. Since when did we get that deal? If being oppressed ain't safe, why do you think fighting it should be? I mean, we're responsible for a lot of mistakes we made as feminists, and maybe offering the false hope, the false solution of safe space is part of it. So let me shut up. I believe that we have privilege to fight oppression. We have the privilege of being able to vote to determine the election of our country. I actually had the joy in 1994 of monitoring the elections in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was elected president. And I watched people stand in lines for 3 days in hot, broiling sun to vote. And I came home saying, I'm never gonna not vote again. I just can't. Because if people are willing to do that, how can I not go to an air-conditioned booth that takes all of 5 minutes. You know, and even if I had to stand in line in Arizona for 3 hours, I mean, we just can't take our privileges for granted. And we can't be bystanders watching the political train wreck of our reality show politics right now, using our cynicism as an excuse to not do anything. You know? And I have to honestly say, the people I probably respect the less are those who know better, who choose not to act and become, at best, bystanders to oppression. While others have to endure oppression because they can't risk their lives, their immigration status, or their jobs, we are honored to be able to challenge it with our radical consciousness, with our newly minted degrees, with our passports that allow us to go to places, with our freedom of speech that allow us to say things that get people killed in other countries. You know, don't take our American privileges for granted. We have to fight for them all the time. And while we can afford to be optimistic about the future, I don't think we can afford to be naive about what the risk is right now. So we have a chance to build a united and strategic human rights movement that brings our strengths together, that uses our differences as a platform for a positive future built on justice and the politics of love, rather than a return to the past based on the politics of fear. Those are our choices. I would argue that if you choose to make your life matter as an activist, it will bring you joy, it will bring you pain, but I promise you, you will never, ever be bored. Thank you.